Okay, so we are on page 39, and we're in the second Torah portion of the book of Leviticus. And I think let's just read the part above the line, the scriptural pieces here, even though we already did 5. Okay, so actually, I think 5 and 6 are connected, so I want to refresh our memories. Let's start from 5. Speaking about the fire burning on the altar. The altar obviously needed fire, and there were actually a few different fires on the altar, in different parts of the altar. But there was wood, and had to be fire. And as we mentioned before, and it'll come up in different places, there was a fire. We're told that the functionaries needed to light the fire in a conventional way, with putting fire to the wood. But there was a fire from above that would come down it was a heavenly fire to devour the offerings. Let's start at 5. The fire burning on the altar must not be allowed to go out. There had to be a consistent fire. And that is where the tradition has come in many synagogues to have what's called a ner tamid, a consistent flame, consistent light, because the altar had the fire had to be consistently burning. For although divine fire will consume the sacrifices, he must start burning them up with fire produced by human agency. The priest chosen each day for the task must kindle fresh wood upon it every morning, and he must arrange the cut up pieces of the morning daily ascent offering directly upon it. Meaning, this should be the first sacrifice offered up each morning, such that no parts of any other sacrifice intervene between it and the fresh logs placed on the fire each morning. The priest must burn up the fats of the peace offerings, as well as any other sacrifices that may be offered up that day, upon the remains of the morning daily offering. Meaning, only after the morning daily offerings have been offering has been offered up. Similarly, the last sacrifice offered up each day must be the afternoon daily offering. And actually, we didn't do a closer look. I'm in 5, so I'm glad we just did that. The section of a closer look is more, not so much in the spiritual rhythm, but the things that the publishers here felt we should know as far as the nuts and bolts of Jewish practice, or of understanding the scripture. So what they have, what the Torah describes here is a norm, an axiom for offerings in the temple, is that there was this consistent offering in the morning, the same one brought every single day of the year. And the morning one was called the tamid, means a perpetual offering, shel shachar, of the shachar. To mirror that, correspond to that, we have our morning prayers, which is we call shacharit, the morning one. And then there was a perpetual closing out offering. Tamid again means perpetual, and that was of the mincha. And corresponding to that, we have our mincha prayer. That was done late afternoon. Now, the closer look here calls attention to something that there wasn't an exception to that. That because what you had is that these are the bookends of all the offerings, and on your average day there was traffic, but it wasn't a challenge to fit all the offerings into that space between the two bookends, so to speak, because if it was a day 3,000 years ago on a Jewish calendar, none of us sitting on, not necessarily with any of us sitting on this Zoom, have a reason to bring an offering. There were specific needs. There's one day of the calendar that each and every one of us would have to be at least part of an offering, and that was the day before Pesach. For Passover, everybody had to be part of a Paschal offering. So he didn't bring individual, but families would come, groups would come, That was the highest traffic day in the temple for offerings because there's just so many people and so many of those going on. So that was a day where the regular perpetual offering, and the Talmud talks about how this conclusion is drawn, and there's some scriptural allusions to it. But the idea was that there had to be a perpetual afternoon offering, but all the Passover offerings were able to be brought up until nighttime because they were trying to get as many people in as possible. So it says the last sacrifice offered up on the right side, last sacrifice offered up each day must be the afternoon daily offering. The only exception to this rule is a Passover offering, which is offered up after the afternoon daily offering of the 14th of Nisan. That they could go as far as they could, as long as they needed. Okay. Now number 6. Back up to the verses. The fire that will burn upon the altar must also serve as the source of the fire used to kindle the lamps of the candelabrum, which must be lit regularly every evening. The just articulated this was the fire that would be the source of the fire used to kindle the lips of the candelabrum. In other words, the menorah that also had to be lit every evening. And where would they light that from? A lighter or match? Really, what they would take it from, the light for the menorah was taken. The fire for the menorah was taken from the altar. The just articulated prohibition against letting the altar fire go out is herewith repeated in order to make anyone who infringes it liable to 2 rounds of lashes. The fire on the altar must not go out. When the tabernacle will be succeeded by the permanent temple, the priests must maintain multiple fires on the altar, at least one for burning the sacrifices and one for producing the coals used to burn incense every day on the inner altar, with the possible addition of 2 others, one for keeping wood burning in case the main fire needs to be augmented, and one for burning those portions of the offerings that were not consumed by the main fire. So there were several fires. In addition, the priest must make another fire in Yom Kippur for producing the coals used to burn the incense used in the sacrificial rites of that day. So the altar had several fires, and those fires, that fire from that altar was used to also light the menorah. So now let's get to the Hasidic insights on the right side of 39. So, say the fire must not go out. This is a perpetual fire, a ner tamid. So first, let's look at 2 interesting details in the fire, in the halachic details as part of this fire and how it was handled. It says the fire on the altar must be kept burning even on the Shabbos, despite the fact that starting or stoking a fire on the Sabbath is normally prohibited. We're not on Shabbos. We're not supposed to light a fire. We're not supposed to cook, but we're also not supposed to stoke a fire, extinguish a fire. We're not supposed to increase or decrease in the energy of the fire. So you can't add to a fire either. Stoking is often strengthening. So we really leave fires alone. Now, from the way that the Torah describes this, we have to do whatever we can to make sure that this fire is consistent, and that overrides Shabbos. And therefore, the idea is that the fire, presumably going into Shabbos, it was fine. So even if it starts to die down, it would be permitted, which is an outlier for Shabbos observance. It's an exception to Shabbos observance, would be able to stoke it, or even if you had to start it. Okay. So that's one idiosyncrasy when it comes to the fire on the altar, Shabbos. In addition, we have seen, and we'll see further on, how ritual defilement precludes a person from entering the tabernacle and performing sacrificial rites. If a Kohen had been walking in the woods and found a dead mouse and picked it up, the person with that Kohen would need to go through purification, mikveh, just in order to be able to do temple rites. There was different types of, which we really haven't gotten into yet, different types of ritual defilement, to use that word. Now, what happens if no undefiled priests are available? If we have, for whatever reason, something has been going on and no one is available to go and check on the altar to make sure that the fire, because that had to be pretty consistently checked to make sure that the fire hasn't gone out. It's a biblical commandment, no less a biblical commandment than hearing the shofar or eating matzah on Pesach or anything like that. This is a biblical commandment of obviously, like any biblical commandment of tremendous import. They had to keep an eye on that altar. Let's say only person to be able to do that is a priest who's not in ritual shape to be able to go into the into the area to be able to maintain it. So maybe if he was able to see it from outside, he could watch from outside. But now he sees it's going out, nobody else is around. There is an exception. He can go in to the temple precinct and do something on the altar, which is a service, to be able to keep that fire going. No undefiled priests are available. Ritually defiled priests are allowed to enter and perform the rites, including tending the fire on the altar. Okay, so these are two exceptions, and we're going to look at some Hasidic insights from these halachic exceptions where Shabbos one was allowed to override the normal prohibition against starting or stoking or increasing a fire on Shabbos. That could be done if it was necessary for the fire on the altar, and a priest who was not in ritual shape to be in the temple precinct, and much less even doing a service, if there was no one else available, the undefiled priests would be permitted to go into the temple precinct and care for the fire on the altar. So we're going to get into that a little bit. So I think just as a second of background to what they're going to say here is that in Hasidic thought, there is emphasis put on the fact that there were two altars. We're talking about an altar where the offerings were brought. That was what we're going to call the outer altar. It was inner as far as outside. It was in the temple precinct, but it wasn't in the most innermost. It wasn't in the innermost room or sanctuary within the temple, and that's where most of the action went on. But there's also an inner temple, an inner altar. So there's an outer altar, an inner altar. The inner altar was more for incense, which we're going to be getting into. Not now, but we will be getting into that. So there's an outer altar and an inner altar. And in the Hasidic thought, say the altar here, it corresponds to our hearts, to our emotional dynamics, internal dynamics. There's we're going to call an inner heart and a more outer heart. What does this mean? There are times in life when, usually quiet times, when we're connected to our feelings and we're connected to life, and one can have moments of meditation, contemplation, joy, but joy is usually it's an inner satisfaction. It's usually not an excited one. It's being grounded and feeling balanced, feeling connected, feeling meaningful, and feeling satisfied with I'm not talking about smug self-satisfaction, but feeling that things work. Then there's something that we call enthusiasm, passion, and energetic positivity. That's very good stuff. It's usually not as much as centered and quiet, and it can come from something that doesn't come through more of an internal cognition and contemplation. It's something happens and you're happy. So, there's the, oh my gosh, wow. And then there's that can happen in a moment of something. You just saw something now, or someone just called you, told you won a lottery, whatever. And then there's the quieter, balanced, in a way more spiritually profound and mature sense of connectedness with ourselves and whatever is powerful to us. So while deeper satisfaction is the inner altar, so to speak, is obviously it's inner and deeper. There's a lot of value to the outer altar, to the energy we bring to life. And there isn't a certain emphasis on that in Hasidic life, to not only focus on the quieter, more cerebral, or more contemplative or meditative inner joy, but because Torah wants us to engage busy life, and busy life and quiet meditation don't necessarily go together. So to bring our positivity and sense of joy, not only in that quiet way, but bring it to an outer altar to engage life, not in a shallow way, but with being in a frame of mind where we're seeing the positivity, we're feeling positivity, we're feeling enthusiastic about what's in front of us and the day in front of us, even if I'm not sitting in quiet meditation. So having said that, let's take a look at where it goes. As the divine fire within our hearts, which here corresponds to our enthusiastic desire to cling to God through studying His Torah, fulfilling God's commandments, and revealing God's presence in the world, must also be constantly stoked and kept alive. The idea that we have an enthusiasm at our place in the world and our opportunity to connect with God, our opportunity to have a meaningful life, and this is obviously they're focusing very, very spiritually, studying Torah, fulfilling commandments, clinging to God, but that also means spending time with people who matter. It means doing anything meaningful in the world through a Torah lens is also clinging to God, even if it's again spending time with loved ones, but in an appropriate way, with the intent of gelling with people who are close to you, or whatever it may be. There's so many meaningful things we can do in the world that on the face aren't necessarily ritualistic, but they are meaningful. And if we see them that way, it all fits into this rubric. And if we see them as meaningful, there should be a spring in our step of seeing the beauty in it. It's not just something that's happening or something that we're going through or something we're getting through. We're lucky to be alive, and we're lucky to be able to have this opportunity, and we're happy with it. So that type of enthusiasm must be constantly stoked and kept alive, because Torah thought, Hasidic thought is realistic. And being realistic about human nature recognizes that human nature waxes and wanes, as far as our attention span, as far as what matters to us, as far as our enthusiasm. People are people, and people get tired, and sometimes what really interested us a short time ago, it doesn't interest us as much now, and that's developmentally, so to speak, that's not abnormal. At the same time, when it comes to things that really matter, we should keep up our enthusiasm. So if I'm I live with a family that I see every day, and there's nothing new about today, coming home to dinner, ideally, I would take a moment to think about the blessing I have of seeing these people who are my family, and have some appreciation and enthusiasm, not jumping up and down, but some palpable enthusiasm for the fact that I'm blessed with these people I know, or this person I know, or whatever it is. So it often takes mental guidance to frame what we're living so we can feel enthusiasm, because enthusiasm by nature will calm and die down, and maybe even dissipate. And what the Torah is telling us, what Hasidic thought points out very clearly, is that the engine which drives our lives and how we approach our lives is very much our emotions and how we feel about things. And guiding our lives, guiding our minds, so that we feel enthusiasm about the things we're doing on any day, because we see the meaning in it, is it's a very important ingredient to leading a meaningful life. In a way, one can say that the entire Chabad Hasidic thought is all about that idea. The book of Tanya that the founder of Chabad wrote is very much about the guided imagery, I guess we'd call it, mental guidance, to be able to bring ourselves to a place where we're enthusiastic about the opportunities we have in life, even though the same opportunities we've had for the past decades. But the fact is, we're seeing them with a fresh eye because it's today, and newly appreciating things that we would otherwise take for granted. So this is the direction that's going on, the idea that we want to try and keep that enthusiasm. And enthusiasm, we call that outer altar. In other words, that layer of heart, layer of emotions, which isn't that deep, cerebral, contemplative, but it's the feeling, palpable enthusiasm. And that must also be constantly stoked and kept alive. The law that the altar fire must be kept lit even on the Sabbath and even in times of defilement teaches us the following lessons. Why? How does this relate? Because we have seen that the essence of the Sabbath is the ascent of consciousness from its active orientation toward transforming the world into God's home into a passive orientation toward experiencing the world as already being God's home. Okay, so that's a bit of a mouthful. The idea of Shabbos, and we discussed this before, God rests. God doesn't rest because God is tired. The idea of resting is the idea of withdrawing. God going to a deeper level within the divine, where God reached outside of the pure oneness of everything being godly, and spoke the world into being. And speaking means there's an other. God wanted to create another. God was reached outside himself, so to speak, to create a world that feels itself independent. And then on Shabbos, say God retreats, so to speak, like actually when we're speaking to someone, when we're trying to convey something to someone, we may enjoy it, but it takes a certain strain inside to be able to frame our words and be able to be constructive in what we're articulating. Withdrawing from that is resting. The rest is a concept of withdrawal. Now I don't have to do that strain. And using that metaphor that God engages the world or created the world in 6 days, and the seventh day wasn't so much about creating and reaching outside himself, so to speak, to create this independent existence, but really withdrawing and bringing the world with him into his own thoughts. So the world itself is at a higher level on that seventh day. And we mirror that, where 6 days a week, we're engaging the world, pounding the pavement, trying to be creative in the world and constructive in the world to make this a better world for humanity, for God, as God wants us to, to transform the world by in a Torah way. And on Shabbos, we're leaving the world alone, and we are soaking in the beauty of God's world, and of a week where, although we're always making a mistake or two, but the fact is that we're seeing the beauty. We're supposed to soak in the beauty of the nachas that God certainly feels from another week we have of making the world better. And part of the Shabbos candles we light is that mental illumination for us to see perhaps where this past week we might have tripped here or there, but also to be able to see the beauty of what we've accomplished in the week, in our relationships, in the lives we lead. So in that sense, to use their language, we transition Friday night from active orientation toward transforming the world into a more passive orientation of experiencing the world as being God's home. We're living in a different space. We don't need to perfect the world where we're looking at the world and seeing and living more its potential and visualizing it. So, and this is why we are forbidden to engage in weekday work on the Sabbath, because involvement in worldly affairs contravenes the higher reality of the Sabbath. And we've been through this. I didn't want to make this a whole thing about Shabbos, because I think we've been through it a few times. But it's the idea of the constructive actions. Even it's not so much work that we're not supposed to do on Shabbos, but it's constructive creativity. As important as that is 6 days a week, that's not a Shabbos thing. And therefore, so we're withdrawing from the world. We're withdrawing from the active engagement in changing the world and leaving the world as it is. Now, so that's Shabbos. Shabbos is a quiet time. Shabbos is a time for prayer. Shabbos is a time for introspection. Shabbos is a time for connecting with loved ones. It's a quiet time. Now, cognizant of this fact, we might think that whenever we enter into a Sabbath experience, meaning whenever our minds become entranced with God's presence in our lives, and therefore we become absorbed in basking in this revelation. So whenever Shabbos is a contemplative zone for 25 hours. So we would say we are not only allowed to detach ourselves from the world, but encouraged to do so. And we need not bother to make this ascent of consciousness have any impact on our emotional involvement and our daily observance of the Torah's laws. So if I am work 6 days a week to try to find enthusiasm in my daily job as a postal worker, and I'm trying to keep in my mind, much as maybe I don't like my job that much, but I'm feeling that the value of what I'm bringing to society and earning money for my family, and recognizing that this is I am with this job. This job is a valuable piece of me being who God wants me to be in the world. So I should be happy about it. I should be enthusiastic about it. So that's for 6 days a week or 5 days a week. Shabbos, I'm retreating from that. Shabbos, I'm not thinking about my job. Shabbos, I'm not thinking about my struggles. Shabbos, I'm trying to soak in a world at its potential and its oneness with God, and my oneness with God, and my oneness with my loved ones. So it's really not so much, it's not about me maintaining enthusiasm for the things I do during the week. That's what one might think. and one could totally feel that that's the right thing. Yet, the Torah teaches us that the fire of the heart must be kept aflame even on the Sabbath. Our connection with God must never become a purely intellectual affair, must always set our hearts aflame as well. So while I shouldn't be, on Shabbos, I shouldn't be thinking about the aggravation of my job. Shabbos is a day which it's the seventh in a stream of days. Shabbos is part of a week, and my week is largely about being productive in the world, and being productive in the world with an enthusiasm and an energy and a passion, because I believe I'm doing God's work. So sitting back on Shabbos doesn't mean totally divorcing myself from my week. It's about bringing blessing into my week, bringing new consciousness into my week, bringing new appreciation, enthusiasm into my week. So while I don't want to, if I don't like my supervisor at work, sitting and talking about that on Shabbos will disrupt my Shabbos, and I shouldn't. Still in all, the detachment of Shabbos is not total detachment. It's detachment from the aggravation and from the shallowness of the week. But it's a detachment that allows me clearer perspective on the value of the week, on the excitement of the week. And hopefully I come out of the gate of Shabbos with more enthusiasm for my week ahead. And that comes from a Shabbos. So the idea here is that the insight here is that fire on the outer altar was critical for it to be perpetual, even Shabbos. When someone say, "Oh, the outer altar, why do I need that on Shabbos?" I have a fire on the inner altar for Shabbos, because Shabbos is one of those holy moments. It's a time of contemplation. It's a time of seclusion and stepping back from the world that I struggle with. So who needs that fire, the outer altar? What we're saying is, Chassidic thought is saying is that in the real world, Shabbos is an island, but it's not an island to itself. It's an island connected to 6 other days. And the beauty of Shabbos is not only in Shabbos, but it's in the enthusiasm and the energy it brings to the rest of the week. So that's even on Shabbos, there must be that fire burning on what we're going to call the outer altar, the enthusiasm, which doesn't necessarily fit within the quiet contemplative Shabbos. The quiet contemplative Shabbos should be feeding that enthusiasm of what we're calling the outer altar. To take this further, it says at the other end of the spiritual spectrum, we may sometimes feel so distant from the Torah's expectations of us, are encumbered by negative spiritual baggage, that it's hard for us to imagine how we could even begin to live in accordance with such ideals. A person may walk in here, let's say if in my life, it's happened more than once, and say, I'm too far gone. Rabbi, after what I've done, the life I've led, focus on my kids, maybe I'm gone. As far as the Jewish community or connection with God, or whatever they may feel. In other words, for me to feel some active, enthusiastic engagement with God, I think it's my experience tells me that that's not an unusual thing for some people who lived a life which feels to them very disconnected from this. And the idea, one of the lesson here is that we should never see ourselves as so distant. In times of such pessimism, we are told to keep our divine fire burning also in times of ritual defilement. We said that the ritually defiled Kohen, in the absence of others, was able to go in and keep that fire burning. And the message is that the perpetual fire is relevant to everyone. And therefore, even though there are technical reasons that the ritually defiled Kohen should not be going in there, but in the absence of anyone else, he has a real relationship with that fire and has the mitzvah to go and keep the fire burning. And therefore, someone who tells you or tells me that they're too far gone, the answer is there's no such thing. That now we have a day ahead of us, we have an opportunity ahead of us, and if they can put themselves into a place, he or she can put themselves into a place to be enthusiastic about a mitzvah that they can do, he or she can do to connect with their heritage, with God, with Torah living, even if it's in one aspect, and they're not sure what's going to happen afterwards. At this point, if we can find that enthusiasm, that fire has to be kept burning. We are told to keep a divine fire burning, or sometimes a ritual defilement, even when we feel unqualified or otherwise unable to enter realms of holiness. On to page 40. At the bottom of the left side. By keeping our enthusiasm fired, even in such times, the divine flame within us will eventually burn away all impediments to joyful, holy living. The very energy that we expend in doing good things, see, that's a fire that burns away negativity. Putting energy into sweating or putting emotional energy into doing good things is not just a one-time deal. It has an internal impact on us. And that is something that we may not be able to feel on the spot, but the resonance of having an exciting or passionate or very engaged experience in good things, it will have an echo internally. And that we find that the Maggid of Mezrich was the teacher of the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Zalman. He was the student of the Baal Shem Tov and the teacher of Rabbi Zalman. His name is Rabbi Dov Meir of Mezrich. A Maggid means a preacher. He was the preacher of Mezrich. He interpreted this verse that we're talking about. It says, the verse says, the fire should be kept burning and not be allowed to go out. So he had a play on words. It says the fire of the heart should be kept burning, and it will extinguish the knot, the negativity. If the inner fire, it works in the Hebrew, if the inner fire of the heart is kept burning continuously, it will extinguish all negativity. The fire can only work its magic if it is kept burning continuously. It doesn't mean that if it wasn't kept continuously, we lost the opportunity. But the idea is that when we lose our zest or enthusiasm, we're in a vulnerable space. Any lapse in enthusiasm is an opportunity for pessimism to creep in. And pessimism, negativity, lethargy, these are all considered very, very, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but counterproductive feelings for us to feel or nurture. It's an opportunity for pessimism to creep in. An intermittent fire or the memory of recent flames is therefore not enough. We must become adept at keeping our inner fires burning no matter how our moods may vary. And this is a challenge in life for anyone, in any stream of life. And as I said, this is really a focus of Chabad thought about being self-aware, how to use our minds, and that's why the Chabad is called Chabad, Chochmah Bina Das, which means there are three different cognitive functions that we have and how we come up with ideas and cogitate and contemplate ideas and how we connect with those ideas so that we can feel them. Because Chabad doesn't mean it sees Judaism as a cerebral exercise. We don't call it Chabad because that's all that matters. But Chabad, how we frame things, how we use our minds, or by using our minds, we can manage to keep an emotionally vibrant life. At the end of the day, we want to have some emotional vibrancy to what we do, be alive in that way. And the key, you say, is to make sure to be self-aware and to guide our minds so that things are framed, so they look meaningful to us and not like drudgery. Okay. Up to the source of the fire for the lamps of the candelabrum. We said this already. I think we read this. Yeah, we did read this. So we had said that lighting the menorah also came. The fire for lighting the menorah also came from the fire from that outer altar. Even though the candelabrum stood right next to the incense altar, in a way this is counterintuitive, because if I should have brought as a share screen a sketch of how things worked in the temple, but there was, we're going to call it an outer sanctuary, an inner sanctuary. The outer sanctuary had this outer altar where most of the action of the offerings went on. Then when went inside deeper, there was the incense altar, there was the table of showbreads called lechem hapanim, and there was the menorah. And inside that, there was the Holy of Holies. Beyond that, the next one would be the Holy of Holies. So when one had to light the menorah, and they needed to get fire, there was fire there. Fire was there on the incense altar. Yet they were told to go to the outer room, get fire from the outer altar, and bring that in to light the menorah, which is a little counterintuitive. So even though the candelabrum stood right next to the incense altar, inside the sanctuary, its lamps were lit with fire taken from the sacrificial altar, which stood outside the sanctuary in the tabernacle courtyard. Why would that be? So it explains. The sanctuary structure and the furnishings within it, including the menorah, represent our inner personal spiritual refinement. The processes through which we learn to manifest our divine soul and ascend the ladder of our relationship with God. So all of those inner, in the sanctuary part, the holy, however we're going to refer to that inner room, all of the things that went on there, the showbread, the menorah, the incense altar, they're all about our internal processes, because we have deep internal processes that we should be focused on. They all are symbols of our own spiritual refinement. In contrast, the surrounding courtyard and the furnishings within it, including the sacrificial altar, the outer altar, represent how we elevate the outside world to higher levels of divine consciousness. So if you're sitting in your living room thinking about, as we should, thinking about life and God and the soul and relationships and who we can be and who we need to be and how we can strengthen our internal psyche and find appreciation for things that we're taking for granted, all of those things. That's what we call it, the inner sanctuary. And the outer sanctuary is about engaging the world. So then you have to leave your living room and you go out and you're with coworkers or friends and you're making the world outside beyond your driveway into a better place. And that's part of our charge, part of our mission. So here, the outer one represents how we elevate the outside world to higher levels of divine consciousness. So the fact that the candelabram's lamps are lit with fire taken from the outer altar, rather than from the inner altar, which is again counterintuitive, and you have an inner fire and an inner menorah, but you're taking the outer fire to light your menorah. We're talking about emotionally also here. This teaches us that in order to become a candelabrum, a light illuminating our own spiritual journey, we must tap the resources that are only found outside. The great divine potential sparks in the terminology of Kabbalah that inhere within physical reality. By revealing their divine purpose, thereby elevating the consciousness of the outside to the divine consciousness native to the inside. This is a mystical insight, also very central to Chabad thought, but it's not a Chabad thought, it's a Kabbalistic thought, and it's somewhat counterintuitive, at least from instinctively. The idea is that God gave us lives, God gave us a world, and God gave us a mission. And for us to actualize ourselves, we need to work on our mission. The mission isn't just a job. The mission is a means of energy, a source of energy for us to be able to be of self-actualization. Everybody has a mission somehow, in not only in perfecting themselves, refining themselves, but in making the world a better place. Now, that sphere of influence might only be with a few people on your block. We all know, we know our own. There isn't it's hardly a one-size-fits-all definition of what our mission is. It's a matter of fact, it's very, very individualized. But we need to be honest with ourselves and say it, and ask ourselves, could we possibly have influence? Not shy away from the possibilities, or just automatically dismiss them and say, no, I couldn't have influence on the person. Maybe there is someone I could call, or I could reach out for and make a difference in their lives. And that behooves us to be able to really make sure that we're accurately assessing that. But spiritually speaking, what would tend to be more convenient or more appealing is not elevating an outside world, but reading, contemplating, meditating ourselves. Not to be a hermit, but that our spiritual work within ourselves is much more comfortable. And it could be, at least it could definitely be seen as more bang for the buck, because you can't control someone else's response. What Jewish mysticism tells us is that attitude would be missing the point. We need to try to elevate the world around us. Of course, we need a lot of personal time. We need contemplation. We need prayer. We need all of that self-development. But that self-development is partially a means to an end to be able to actually get out and make a difference. B, our self-development is going to be stunted if we're not spending time outside, because elevating the outside is going to energize our self-development. The founder of Chabad wrote that when one takes their understanding of a meaningful concept and tries to share it with someone else, obviously in an appropriate way, not lecturing someone, all of that, but when you share it, take the time and the effort away from your own studies to go and try and share it. He writes that God rewards us magnifying our own capacity, our own understanding, and our own reach, internal reach, spiritual reach. His language is 1,000 times over. So it's, if I'm trying to understand something spiritual, talking to someone else about it is usually not the way to go. I've got to spend some time in contemplation, studying, and research. And that's true. I should do that. But sharing it with someone, actually, first of all, I think for all of those of us who teach, you can see sometimes you learn a lot through teaching, more than you could have just from contemplation. But aside from this, we say it's also like a spiritual blessing that we're tapping into the world, and because we're helping elevate the world. So there's a spiritual energy there that's going to nourish our own spiritual journey. So by rising to the challenges of the world outside, the sanctuary, far removed from divine awareness, we can not only kindle our own personal lights, but ensure that it remains continuous and steady as well. So that we're going to leave that here. Questions? Not for those of you who will be with us tonight at our gala. Look forward to seeing you. Those who are far afield or can't make it, we'll see you, God willing, in future times.
All right, thank you. This was great.
Okay, be well.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes.